I think we're being cued to get started. They've got this wonderful streaming going. Say hello to all the folks at home and around the world. Thank you for joining us. I know we've got people cruising on in. Welcome, welcome. Appreciate everybody being here. I am Kate Schiffelbein, and I am joined by some wonderful panelists today. I'll let them introduce themselves, but I just want to thank you all for being here. For Is AI the New AE? This has been a really interesting year for AI, for tools like ChatGPT, which I think everyone enjoyed playing with once they came out. There was a lot of hype. There were a lot of news articles that by this time of the year, none of us were going to have jobs. We were all going to be replaced by AI. And clearly, we're all still here. So really excited to talk through this today. Let my panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get on a ride.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. My name is Lindsay Murphy. I'm head of data at Secoda. I'm here with very professionally dressed folks, but I'm in my coveralls, so if you've had a chance to come by our booth, you see we had some puppies and we have some colorful outfits, so thank you for being here.
And I'm Pat Ross. I'm a solution architect with Clymer. We're a cloud data consulting company, and I'm excited to be here as well.
Fabulous. So to touch on kind of that initial point, you know, there was a lot of hype that AI was going to put us all out of jobs, and obviously it hasn't happened. I think we've all been affected by AI in different ways. The tools that we use have implemented, you know, new features and things like that that are using AI, but clearly we're all still here, and we all still have plenty to do. I haven't met anyone yet who says I'm bored and my plate is empty at work. So what I want to touch on is given that AE is still a thing, data engineering is still a thing, what does that world look like right now? And I think, Lindsay, you can kick us up on that.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think looking back at what the hype was when ChatGPT kind of first became more public for everyone, I think it's everybody kind of had to dive in and see what it was capable of. And I think, as we know, there are some limitations. But I think from an AE perspective, if you think about the analytics engineering job, there are a lot of aspects to it that aren't so glamorous, the things that we don't really love to do, like, you know, writing documentation, or in my previous role at a company called Maple based in Canada, we were using dbt and Looker, so we were building documentation in both tools, and a lot of times keeping documentation consistent between those two tools was really difficult. So I think there's a lot of places where ChatGPT can really help with certain things like that, making some of those more manual, tedious tasks a little bit easier. But that really just frees up AEs to focus on some of the more complex things that, you know, maybe we didn't have as much time for before because we're busy, you know, rewriting documentation in another format. So I think, hopefully it's giving us a little bit more freedom to automate some of our workflows and put a bit more of our time back into the problems that are a little bit more interesting to solve, hopefully.
I think that's the point. I mean, I know, Pat, you're deep in the engineering side.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, who among us hasn't tried asking ChatGPT to write an API call for you or something like tedious like that? You know, it's not really quite at that point yet where it's going to replace your ability to write your own code to the extent that you can, but definitely a time saver.
Definitely. And I think, you know, when we look at this, so obviously there was the hype. That didn't quite play out. But have we seen examples where maybe there is some replacement already, or maybe some of the things that we were afraid was going to happen have happened? And so what have we already seen, and how are we responding to that?
You mean like people copying and pasting things straight out of ChatGPT and sending them in an email?
Essays that start, as an AI, I can't answer that question.
Exactly. No, I mean, I don't think we've seen the wave of job replacements that everyone's been afraid of yet. I don't know that it's coming anytime in the near future either. I still think of it as more of an augmentation tool.
Yeah, for sure. And like even just Copilot, things like that, like some of those things that people are adding into their workflows, it's just sort of making, it might not be taking a whole role away, but it's definitely going to change your job for sure, which I think there was a panel down here yesterday that was talking a lot about, you know, data roles are continually evolving with all the new tools and all the new things that we have at our disposal now. It just changes what your job really is. And so it's you know, thinking about what the definition of the role actually is and how that's going to change over time. I think that just kind of opens up more opportunities for us.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. Where do you see those concerns that people may be having as valid now or in the near future?
Yeah, I think as I look at when I've managed teams and how I've used ChatGPT and things like that, I think where I would be concerned is if the value I was providing to my org came entirely from the time that I had, right? Instead of from my brain and the thoughts that I had and my understanding of the business. Because if what you have to contribute is just repetitive tasks and time, that's where I see a threat. That's where I see somebody's going to go, that's repetitive. I bet I can automate that. I bet AI can do that. And so that's where I see the concern is if you are just chugging through the same tasks every day, I might look at that job and go, ooh, maybe that's at risk. And so how I would respond to that is I would figure out if I was in that position and currently my value comes from my time, I'd be looking at how can I get ahead of this? Let me use the AI tools in order to expedite some of those things, automate some of those things, and then show my organization that my value comes from my brain, my understanding of our business, and whatever it might be, because we're a lot further off from an AI replacing that as opposed to a repetitive task.
Sounds like there's an opportunity to learn some new skills.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome.
Do you have anything to add to that, Lindsay?
I think a big part of it, like we at Secoda, we've built generative AI into our platform, and it does a lot of really great things. But I think one of the things that you notice when you start working with these tools is that the underlying data quality is incredibly important. So it does put a lot more focus on that. Like I think sometimes some of the things that data, adding metadata or adding tags to certain models in DBT, like those things might have been an afterthought before, and I think those need to be really top of mind for a lot of data teams because that really just puts the power back into the ability that generative AI is going to have in the quality of the responses that it gives.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I read a really interesting article last week about ChatGPT and LLMs like that training themselves on websites like Stack Overflow or Reddit that are primarily contributed to by users. And as more and more people go to use tools like ChatGPT or just get answers straight from Google instead of going to these websites, it disincentivizes people to actually post things there. And then that reduces the LLM's ability to learn in the future from human added things. So it's almost kind of like eating its own lunch.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Awesome. Pat, what do you think about like how ChatGPT is going to change some of the new roles and opportunities? So we've talked a bit about opportunities that are out there, but how do you kind of see, hearing things like prompt engineers and all these new roles that are coming out? What do you think we'll see over the next little while in terms of changing roles?
Yeah, I certainly think there's going to be a need for new skill sets, including prompt engineering. Another analogy I always go back to, though, is everyone said ATMs were going to get rid of bank tellers, and there's now more bank tellers today than there ever were before. So we might have more analytics engineers 5-10 years from now than there are today because it's just increasing the demand for that skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so interesting to see that a lot of organizations seem to think that implementing ChatGPT or a similar tool was plug and play and that it was going to be this silver bullet. And I've talked to so many people who just laugh and they're like, have you seen our data warehouse? Like, good luck. If it can pick this up and run with it, good riddance. I wish it all the best. And so I think really there's going to be a huge opportunity for, like we talked about, gaining some new skills and understanding how do you fine-tune a warehouse, how do you fine-tune your data structure to be really approachable for an AI tool, for some sort of LLM. And so I think if you have those skills or you're willing to seek out those skills in order to be the expert and be able to say, this is how we want to implement this structure in our warehouse or whatever it might be, I think those opportunities are going to come up. And what you're going to see is, we've got architect roles and engineer roles and things like that. I think you're going to see those types of roles dedicated to making sure there is a very strong foundation for an AI to learn from.
Yeah, for sure. And you hear a lot about the changes that it's going to bring to data modeling, things like that. Like, it's like, do you still need to model your data in the same way if you're going to start putting LLMs on top of that? Like, maybe doing it in the way that a lot of teams are doing it now isn't necessarily going to be the best path forward. I think another interesting aspect is around learning. So we've all heard the news stories of people, there's like lawyers out there who put put a summary of a case together for me in ChatGPT, and it like makes things up that don't even exist. They get in a lot of trouble for that. I think that's the case for anyone learning, right? Like I wrote a LinkedIn post a couple months ago about how I'm not very good at writing Python, but I know enough to be able to read something and kind of figure out how it works. So using ChatGPT to get me started on, write a function that does this, and it can at least give me some boilerplate to get me started. That's really helpful because I have, a bit of a baseline knowledge. But I think if there's people, building their skills and expecting ChatGPT to do all that for them, and they don't have that basic understanding, it's going to get you in a tricky spot. So I think it changes a lot for people learning and building their skill set.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on the idea of it being an opportunity for thinking about data modeling in different ways that we really haven't in the past or haven't had a reason to in the past. On that note, we've talked a little bit about how AI could, at least in its current stage, is really more of an augmentation tool than a replacement for an analytics engineer. How do you see AI augmenting or changing the day-to-day workflow of analytics engineers right now?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about this at the beginning, but I think it just kind of brings away some of the aspects of the tedium of the job. Like I'm working on, so I joined Secoda in the last few months, and I've been working on building out our data stack, and some of the things that just get left, it's like, I'll write the documentation later, I'll just get back to that later. So that stuff, now can hopefully be a little bit more automatic, and you're not really spending as much time building that out. And obviously, tools like Copilot are pretty nice. I'm always pretty impressed with like how well it actually, you write out the beginning of a CTE and it kind of figures out what it thinks you should actually write. So things like that I think are just speeding a lot of the work up that previously maybe felt like a bit of a grind.
Another productivity increase. So that just means that more is expected out of all of us, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is when you look at it and you look at the day-to-day for a developer, I feel like right now so many of us get in that mindset of like, I just got to chug through. I got to, write whatever I'm writing. I got to get this code out. I got to get this query written. But I think where things start to get more automated, you're going to see a shift into having to do a little bit more of that QA. We've touched on all the times where it's generated something wrong or something that was completely false. And so I think where the day-to-day might shift a bit as a developer is you're going to have to take more time to step back and really consider, is this valid? If I used AI to automate, whether it's writing a piece of code or writing a query or whatever it is, you have to be both sides of your PR, right? Because you're not only producing it, but you've got to be able to step back and go, okay, do I agree with what was generated? And if you run through your test, do I agree with the output? And those sorts of things. So I think it's going to force developers to do a little bit of that QA role, take on a little bit of that. And I think it's also really important. There's different phrases for it, right? The sniff test, the gut check. Does something pass a sensibility test? And I think that's going to become a really important skill for developers, is to be able to think about that before they pass something on. Because what you don't want to do is obviously get that merged in. I know we've all been parts of teams where you're like, we trust each other, right? Somebody says, can you approve this PR? And you're like, yep. And merge and off it goes, right? And I think we're all going to have to take a little bit of a step back and breathe and think about that. If now the AI is writing the code, does that really make sense? Does this match our business process? Does this really fit into the bigger picture? Because I think it's going to be way too easy to generate, PR, yep, approve, merge, off it goes, and then we're going to have a tangled web to unweave, so to speak.
Yeah, it's kind of, I sort of think of it as like, treat it like almost like a junior engineer. That it's like you go with that level of trust where it's like, it's learning, it's giving you feedback on what you've given to it, but you do really want to have that scrutiny and kind of, double check the work that it's producing.
I'm still waiting for ChatGPT to send me a PR request, but
It's going to happen. Yeah. It's going to happen at some point.
On that note, it's a perfect segue to my next question, actually, and let's start with Kate on this one since you kind of brought it up. What risks at present do you see in the near future for implementing something like ChatGPT or other LLMs into your workflows?
I think there are a lot of risks, to be honest. And I think that's something that maybe is hard for the business teams to hear. That's a hard pill to swallow because they want to believe it's the silver bullet, right? Recently there have been a number of stories of companies that have had to ban ChatGPT inside their organizations because of data leaks. Samsung was a big one. I think there were some banks that got hit with that, where developers were just taking production client data, feeding it into ChatGPT, and not thinking about the data ramifications of that. So I think from a privacy standpoint, that is very scary. And I think especially as we look at, we're here in beautiful California. California has an aggressive set of privacy controls, right, around data. You've got the GDPR, which I'm sure lots of people in this room have had to deal with and deal with on a daily basis. And so you've got all of this compliance and all of these things that are going to come into play. And so when you look at something where it is so easy, I can just take a CSV of this data that I want analyzed and upload it into ChatGPT and get a nice result. But I'm not thinking about where that's going. I'm not thinking about who then has access to that data. And so I think if I was a compliance officer, I would have had a very hard time this year, probably would have invested in some Tylenol, because thinking about where all of that data is going, and there's been just this insane emergence of new tools, right? All these new tools are coming out of the woodwork, which are really cool, but once again, what's the man behind the curtain? What is happening with that data when it gets passed through? So I think that's one of my big concerns when it comes to using a tool like this. I think the other one that really comes to mind is, everybody's familiar with the phrase bad data in, bad data out, right? And when you're using an AI tool, it's a little bit more masked. We're not seeing how the sausage is made. And so I think if we have a situation where, does this sound familiar? The data team is pressured to move really fast and get a bunch of things pulled together and pull data from all sorts of different new places and get into the warehouse and make it available to a new tool. Go. And then all of a sudden that's driving an AI tool that is making business decisions. You're setting your marketing budgets. I mean, we heard in the keynote this morning about making headcount decisions based on things. And if this is an AI that is now making headcount decisions and allocating marketing budgets and doing all of these things, that's a very scary thing. And so I think that's one of the big risks, is if you are blindly trusting an AI to make those decisions for you, you got to make sure you really understand what platform you're using and what data is being fed into that platform in order to make those decisions. Because I think it's far too often that, data quality and data ops, not regarded as the sexiest career. Very sorry to everyone who's on the same team as me with that. I love data quality, I love health and monitoring, I love doing all of those things, but how often do we really get the budget for the tools we need or the time budget to implement those things properly? And I think we get rushed into setting things up, and I worry about what that means, for the decisions that are going to be made by AI.
Yeah, for sure.
That's there.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is really more around that piece for sure, but also around data, like the culture of a data-driven organization. I think that culture piece is always so difficult. And to me, it feels like, if companies are already not quite there in their data-driven journey, they sort of just believe like, oh, now we have AI, we can just, replace our data team. We don't really need a data team anymore. It's like, that would be a frankly insane decision to make. But if there's a leadership in an organization who doesn't really understand some of these limitations, and they kind of push for that, or they think that we need to have fewer people on the data team because now we have these AI tools, I think that actually could kind of slow things down and stall the progress of companies trying to become more data-driven. So yeah, hopefully people are being thoughtful about that.
Yeah, I agree with the risks that both of you shared. I see both of them as massive opportunities, though, at the same time. On one hand, you have opportunities to build or retrain or use techniques like transfer learning to build custom LLM models where you don't have to send data outside of the organization to alleviate some of those privacy concerns. And on the other hand, there's opportunities for AI observability tools or AI privacy tools and governance tools, just like we have data observability and governance tools right now. So Again, I think it's just going to increase, going back to my thought from earlier, I think it's just going to really increase the demand for this profession more than anything else.
Yeah, I agree.
I do have a follow-up for that. How do you convey some of those risks that we were just talking about to your stakeholders?
Yeah, I think, this is where you have to be willing to be very, I'll say blunt, with your business teams, right? When a COO or a CFO goes, I found this great AI tool, it's going to replace half your team, here we go. I think you have to make sure you speak their language, right? And I talk a lot about that in the past about, I think it's really important in general for a data team and a BI team to understand the language of the teams that they are speaking with. And I think when you are talking to executive stakeholders who are asking why you can't replace half your team with AI, I think you really have to express it in their worldview, right? And so we talked before about, compliance officers have probably had a very terrible year. So if it is an executive who deals with legal and deals with compliance, I might turn around and go, great, what I need is for you to spend a whole bunch of money on very expensive lawyers and go look into these 12 different compliance structures that we're gonna have to make sure we comply with. And their eyes will go big and they'll say, I'll get back to you, and you've postponed that at least a quarter, right? With finance, you have to be very clear about, here are the financial risks you are taking by implementing this model, by doing whatever it is you are doing. So, I think it's hard sometimes because we're so technical and we're so in the weeds that you just want to be like, oh my gosh, if you just looked under the hood, you would understand that this is not the silver bowl that you think it is. But you really have to shift yourself to their perspective and communicate it in a way that makes sense to them. That being said, I think you also shouldn't shut down the idea entirely because they are excited about it. People are excited about the potential there. And I do think that it's happening. AI is going to happen. It's going to take on more responsibilities. It's going to keep improving. But so that's where I think sort of your wrap-up message with those stakeholders goes to is, look, we can't do that today. This is not something that's going to change right now. But here's something we could do to progress towards that, right? Here's the steps we can take to get on that path that you're interested in. But let's be responsible. Let's make sure we're, complying with all of the applicable rules, that we're following legal, and that we're not putting ourselves at risk because we got excited about a shiny new toy.
Right.
Yeah, I think too, it's thinking about how you kind of just come back to the fact that it is just a tool. Like, it's not like this magic solution. It's a tool that you need to figure out how to properly use and implement. So kind of framing it for stakeholders in the sense that, just like any other tool in a data stack, you would probably do some sort of a POC. You would kind of look at what's the value that we can drive by adding this, and then what's the cost or the resource overhead by adding something like this. I think there's probably also an opportunity to think about educating more of the company to be more data-driven and kind of have those more critical views on using these types of tools, so that, if you've got people in marketing or finance, asking data questions to, a chatbot or something like that, that they know they have that kind of prompt engineering type of skill set, or maybe they're working on it, to be able to query in the proper ways, to ask really specific questions, to ask follow-up questions, to be skeptical of the answers that you're getting, so that it's not just sort of, you throw it on there as a Band-Aid solution and then you end up in a risky spot.
Yeah, I always go back to, what's the end business goal in mind? What are we trying to achieve here? What are you trying to simplify or increase? And taking time with your stakeholders to really, ask what considerations and risks might present themselves along the way, getting them to pause and think, and not just going off of what they're excited about.
Right.
As data team managers, how do you see AI impacting your role managing data teams?
Yeah, for sure. I am a data team of one again right now, so I'm not managing a team, but I was previously.
Best kind of team.
Yeah.
That's all the teams have won, by the way.
Yeah.
We feel you. We're with you.
Else, yeah. I think this is actually one of the areas of probably some of the most opportunity. Actually, our CEO, Itai, gave a talk earlier today about metadata management and the possibility about that. And I'm very excited to see how AI is going to be able to use that. So I think being able to look at the bird's eye view of your tech stack and be able to get information and data about that, and then feeding that back into AI optimization. So you're hearing things about self-healing pipelines and other types of things like that I think will help to bring, again, some of the more manual steps of managing a team to kind of automate some of that and make it a little bit easier. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to see the tools that we're going to see develop over the next little while to support with that.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I think the other thing as a manager, I feel a very strong responsibility when I am managing a team to make sure that I am making sure that my team members grow as much as they can, right? That they're excelling, that they're getting opportunities, and that I'm helping them secure their job security for their futures, right? I consider that a very important part of being a manager. And so when we've talked about the risks and the opportunities that come with AI and everything that's happening, I think as a manager, you have a new responsibility to look at your teams. If you've got somebody on your team that, like we said before, their value is just right now in their repetitive time that they're contributing, what can you do as a manager to change their work scope, to help them upskill, to make sure that they're getting the opportunity to not suddenly be replaced by a new tool and things like that. So I think that's something else just as a manager that I take very personally of I need to be thinking about for each of my people, how am I making sure that they're best positioned knowing that this is coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, great point. Awesome. So less than a year ago, ChatGPT was the hottest new thing that everybody was talking about, that it was going to change the world. And I think we've talked a lot about that here today, that it didn't necessarily change the world, but it has helped with a lot of things. So now thinking about the excitement's cooled off and we kind of have some more realistic use cases, where do you think we'll be a year from now or even 5 years from now?
I think there's never been a better time than ever to get into this profession, honestly. I know a lot of people are kind of a little nervous about, is this going to take away the demand for my role? I think if anything, like I said earlier, I'm going to keep going back to this, I think if anything, it's going to increase it. It's obviously going to create new opportunities, and yeah, we're all going to have to adapt and learn new skills, prompt engineering, things like that. I'm really excited to start thinking about modeling data in different ways, and as someone that's come up through the engineering profession, I think all of us have had that point of exhaustion with answering ad hoc queries from our stakeholders that, the same one over and over again, once a month, once a week, whatever it is. I'm looking forward to offloading some of that stuff so that we can kind of start thinking about more interesting, insightful, deeper questions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think exactly your last point, being able to focus on the insightful side of things. I think a lot of it for me is I think there's going to be a dramatic shift in how often I'm answering how questions. And whether that's as a manager, how do I do something, or that is, a stakeholder that says, how many leads did we generate last month, right? Or whatever it is. Those kind of questions, I think, are going to switch to the why.
Yes.
And so that's where that business context really becomes valuable. You want to make sure you're understanding the priorities for your company and the priorities for your stakeholders and be able to answer those why questions. Why did we do this? Why should we do this? Whatever it might be. So I think there's going to be that switch, like you said, to being more insightful and being the experts, because you're going to produce the data and now you got to explain why it has an impact.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm excited to see ChatGPT submit a PR. Let's see how that goes. But yeah, I think some of the things that, developer experience, kind of seeing how the profession changes over the next little while will be super exciting. So, yeah.
Awesome.
I think it's going to be great. Well, we are thrilled you all joined us. Happy to take questions now, and we will also all be available in the hallways and nearby if you'd like to follow up later. But just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
You got a couple of minutes? Right on time.
My watch died, so.